I mentioned in number 7 of my talks, Confucius' exclamation, "Water, water," famous exclamation. This is reported by Mencius in 4b18, and Mencius goes on in this passage to describe what he saw in water, what Confucius saw in water. There are two types of water, one that comes from an ample source and comes tumbling down day and night. It moves forward until all the hollows are filled, and then it drains into the sea. According to Mencius, Confucius saw in water just this truth and nothing more. Water that has no source is like rainwater that collects after a downpour. It may fill everything up, but then we can just stand by and wait till it dries up. The moral lesson drawn from this behaviour of water is that a person of benevolence should be ashamed of an exaggerated reputation. If one has an overblown reputation and is conscious that one is praised for things that one has actually not done, and if we are credited with wisdom, which we don't actually have, then this is a matter for shame. It is not for boasting about or for promoting. Self-promotion based on such falsehood would be particularly a matter for shame and should not be done. Such a person as this will shrink before our eyes and will dry up like the water given by the rain. There are some features of human nature which are sustainable and sustained, and there are other temporary phenomena, such as the great reputation of a person who does not deserve this, who flies high for a while and then falls. And in this case, the reputation will vanish, as the rainwater does. How can we learn from water? What is this reasoning? Is it a kind of parable, like those from the mouth of Jesus in the Gospels? Here in the Gospels we know that we're being told a story which has another meaning, a moral and spiritual meaning, perhaps even a hidden meaning, apart from the literal facts of the story. But Confucius' use of the water example does not seem to be like this. The observation of water leads to the development of a moral principle, and it is as if water is us and we are water. In other words, there is a basic kinship which allows social parallels to be drawn. Sarah Allen, in The Way of Water, stresses that the interest in water is not unique to Confucius, but was also important in the Taoist texts, and we will come to these later. Water is the dominant image in the Chinese tradition, and this learning from the nature of water, which is practically universal, is a predominant element in what you might call Confucian psychology, which is strongly tied to the idea that the human being is like the flow of water, and like water needs courses or pathways to be channeled. And if there are human channels, the water will follow its natural course, moving downwards and moving of itself without other prompting. The channels are what is important. Water was an object of fascination for other traditions as well. As among the Greek pre-Socratic philosophers, we have Thales of Miletus, Greek colony in now Turkey, who traced back everything to water as the single principle. One can see why, in that water becomes as hard as rock when frozen. It has the ability to fertilize life in the form of plants. It fills gaps and becomes level. It clears itself of sediment, and it seems to have its own motion. The early Greek philosophers were in general preoccupied by the idea that there must be one single source for reality, or one single element. And whilst Empedocles said otherwise, he said four, in general the idea that reality must be one in origin and in reality, if not in appearance, was really strong. And for Thales, that single reality was water. In Confucianism, the picture is different, in that water is seen as with us and part of us, and in that human nature has learnt from it and its way of operating, its flow, its ability to move itself, and its ability to surround everything in its path. Water sorts itself out and invites certain behaviours, and in this human beings are similar. If the water of the Kanglang River is clear, then we may wash our chin strap. But if the water of the Kanglang River is dirty, we may wash our feet. Confucius observes here, as reported by Mencius, water brings a certain behaviour upon itself. If we transport this idea into the realm of human affairs, as Confucius and Mencius invite us to do, this means that we invite certain behaviours to be visited on ourselves by our demeanour. Our clarity will invite honesty and authenticity, but our muddiness will invite opaque and dubious behaviour. We are so close to the river that we can interpret its way and its moods, and we reciprocate, like with like. If it is dirty, we wash our feet in it, because they are dirty anyway, and it will not be adversely affected, or more than it is now. But if the water is clear, and all the impurities have settled, then the water wants us to respect its purity and respond by using it differently. Mencius goes on to draw a moral lesson from this behaviour of water, or more precisely from our human interaction with water, as follows. Others will seek to destroy a family only when a family invites destruction. If an estate invites invasion, others will invade it. People will only insult you, Mencius says, when you invite insult. How can this be? What does he mean? I think there's a principle running through Confucian thought which says that other human beings react to your behaviour, not to your state of mind. It is not about whether you're feeling hostile or vulnerable or persecuted. It's what is presented to others by your external behaviour, your body language, your facial expression, and the absence or otherwise of deference in your demeanour. Again, differently from the West, it is not you and your internal state of mind which matters. It is how you handle the protocol, or ritual, let's say, of your relationships. Forget Miss Piggy. It's not about moi. It's about the other person and how you act towards that person. In many passages we find reference to the downward movement of water, which is thought to be its natural movement, whereby it finds its own level and does its work in nature. Mencius says in 6a2 that water will flow either to the east or to the west without showing any preference, but it will not fail to show a preference when the choice is up or down. Water always chooses the downwards direction. The tendency of man's nature towards goodness is like the tendency of water to flow downwards. There are none who do not have the tendency towards goodness, just as all water flows downwards. By striking water, you can cause it to jump up and even go over your head, and by damming it, you may force it up a hill. But are such movements in the nature of water, he asks? It is in the force applied which causes these things. When men are made to do what is not good, their nature is dealt with in this way. This is an interesting passage because, firstly, it tells us about the model provided by water, that it actually moves downwards, but it may be made to move upwards, contrary to its nature, by engineering dams or, in our own time, pumps and so on. Mencius here asserts the fundamental goodness of human nature, that it will naturally go downwards like water unless somehow interfered with by human artifice. So humanity is naturally good, flowing downwards like the water, unless another force intervenes and pushes it out of shape. This is a fundamental question to ask about human nature, and a lot hangs on the answer. Mencius makes it clear that in his view, human nature is naturally good and will persist in that path unless other forces are applied. But in asserting this, he's responding to the philosopher Kao Tzu, who also used the image of water, but said that man's nature is like water, in that it can either flow east or west indifferently. He also argued that human nature is indifferent to good and evil in a similar way, and like water, could go either way in this situation. So he does not push for the idea that human beings are naturally evil, or naturally good, for that matter, just that they can go either way. This was a matter of great importance in the West. Socrates seems to believe that human beings were made for goodness and only functioned well when doing so in goodness. And in fact, the function of the human being was indeed the good. Later on, the Christian Platonist Augustine said something quite different, in that he viewed the human heart to be naturally evil and with a natural tendency to delight in sin, whilst at the same time knowing that God was displeased with this. But the British Bishop Pelagius wrote differently, arguing for the innate goodness of the human being. Pelagius' view was that the human being could choose the good and achieve goodness by its own nature, and do so unaided. There was no need for special help. These things matter because this question has a great deal to do with how we view crime and punishment, how we treat criminals, how we view the question of rehabilitation and re-education. All this depends on whether we are optimistic about human nature or not. If you are optimistic about human nature, you would set great store by re-education processes in dealing with crime, and you would de-emphasize punishment. So it raises the question of whether there is a Confucian view of crime and punishment. Next time we will talk further about Confucian psychology and the idea of flow. Thank you for joining me.